A wealthy industrialist spent his fortune trying to save his daughter from permanent blindness. The finest specialists in Europe declared it hopeless her optic nerves were dead. But on a cold autumn morning in a forgotten corner of Brussels, a homeless woman glanced at the child and saw what no expensive doctor could see: hope. What happened next will restore your faith in humanity. If you believe in the power of kindness, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This story will change how you see the world. Let's begin. Let me take you to Brussels, Belgium. A city of chocolate shops and cobblestone streets. A city where old money lives quietly behind iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. And in the wealthy suburb of Waterloo, there stood a mansion. Not just any mansion. This was the kind of home that made people stop their cars just to stare. White stone walls, tall windows, gardens that looked like they belonged in a painting. But if you looked closer, if you paid attention, you'd notice something strange. The curtains were always drawn. The lights were always dim. And no child ever played in that beautiful garden. Because inside that mansion lived a man who had everything, except the one thing that mattered most. His name was Henrik Vandenberg. If you've ever seen a cargo ship crossing the North Sea, there's a good chance it belonged to him. He owned shipping fleets that moved goods across 3 continents. Oil, steel, electronics. You name it, Henrik's ships carried it. He was the kind of man who could make a single phone call and move millions of euros. Businessmen respected him. Competitors feared him. Politicians asked for his advice. But on a cold October night 4 years ago, all of that power meant nothing. Because on that night, in a private hospital in Brussels, Henrik's world fell apart. His wife, Isabel, died. She died bringing their daughter into the world. One moment, Henrik was pacing the hallway, nervous but excited, rehearsing in his mind how he'd hold his baby for the first time. The next moment, a doctor with tired eyes was telling him words no husband should ever hear. "We did everything we could. I'm so sorry." Isabel was gone. Just like that. No warning. No second chances. But there was a baby. A tiny, screaming baby girl with a tuft of dark hair and the tiniest fingers Henrik had ever seen. He named her Elise, after Isabel's grandmother. And for one beautiful moment, holding her in his arms, Henrik thought maybe, just maybe, he could survive this. Maybe this little girl would be his reason to keep going. But then the doctors ran their tests. At first, it was small things. Strange things. When the nurses waved their hands in front of Elise's face, she didn't follow the movement. When they turned on bright lights, she didn't flinch. Her beautiful green eyes that looked just like her mother's, stared straight ahead at nothing. "Give her time," one doctor said. "Newborns take a while to focus." But weeks passed. Then months. Elise never looked at her father's face. She never reached for the colorful toys he bought her. When Henrik walked into the room, she didn't turn toward him. She only knew he was there when he spoke. By the time she was 6 months old, Henrik knew something was terribly, horribly wrong. He took her to the best pediatric hospital in Belgium. They ran tests, brain scans, optical exams. They shone lights. They measured responses. And then they gave him the diagnosis that would haunt him for the next 3 years. "Mr. Vandenberg, I'm afraid your daughter has severe optic nerve damage. The connection between her eyes and her brain is, well, it's not functioning. We believe it happened during the trauma of birth." Henrik sat very still. "Can you fix it?" The doctor looked down at his clipboard. "I'm afraid not. This type of damage is permanent. There's no surgery, no treatment. Your daughter will be blind for the rest of her life." Henrik didn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. He flew in specialists from Zurich, from London, from Boston. He paid for consultations that cost more than most people earned in a year. Every single one of them told him the same thing. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Vandenberg. The damage is irreversible. She will never see." One doctor from Germany was particularly blunt. "Mr. Vandenberg, I understand you want hope. But sometimes the kindest thing we can do is accept reality. Your daughter's optic nerves are dead. No amount of money can bring them back to life." Henrik showed that doctor to the door and never called him again. But deep down, in the quiet moments late at night, Henrik knew the man was probably right. And so, as Elise grew from a baby into a toddler, Henrik did the only thing he knew how to do. He built walls. Not just around his heart, around her entire world. He hired 3 full-time caretakers. He covered every sharp corner in the mansion with soft padding. He replaced the marble floors with thick carpets so she wouldn't hurt herself when she fell. He installed sensors and alarms on every door so she could never wander outside and get lost. He turned his home into a fortress. A beautiful, expensive cage. Greta, the head caretaker, was a kind woman from Bavaria with 30 years of experience. She was patient, gentle. She learned to guide Elise through the house using her voice, her touch, the rhythm of her footsteps. But even Greta couldn't fix what was broken. Elise walked into walls. She tripped over toys she couldn't see. She screamed when people moved her too quickly, when her world shifted without warning. She lived in darkness. Complete and total darkness. And Henrik watched it all, powerless. Every night, the same ritual. After dinner, after her bath, after Greta tucked her into bed, Elise would call out, "Papa," and Henrik would come. No matter how tired he was. No matter how many meetings he had the next morning. He would sit on the edge of her bed, and she would reach up with her small hands. She would touch his face, his beard, his nose, his cheekbones. This was how she saw him. Through her fingers, through texture and shape and the warmth of his skin. "Papa," she would whisper, "tell me about colors." And Henrik would swallow the lump in his throat and describe things she would never see. Red is like warmth, like sitting by a fireplace in winter. Blue is like coolness, like diving into a swimming pool on a hot day. Green is like fresh air, like the smell of grass after rain. She would listen, her blank eyes staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine a world she'd never know. And when she finally fell asleep, Henrik would sit there in the dark, silent tears running down his face. He was a man who controlled shipping routes across the world. A man who negotiated with presidents and prime ministers. But he couldn't save his own daughter. His wealth felt like a cruel, useless joke. And worst of all, there was a feeling he couldn't shake. A gnawing suspicion that kept him awake at night. What if someone somewhere could have helped? What if the doctors were wrong? What if they'd missed something? But every time that thought crept in, he pushed it away. Because the alternative, that he'd failed her, that he'd trusted the wrong people, was too painful to bear. So Henrik Vandenberg lived in his mansion of shadows. Wealthy beyond measure. And completely, utterly helpless. Now let me take you to a different part of Brussels. Not the wealthy suburbs with their mansions and manicured gardens. Not the tourist areas with their fancy restaurants and boutique hotels. I'm talking about the old city. The crowded streets near the Grand Place where vendors shout, where tourists jostle with locals, where the smell of fresh waffles mixes with car exhaust and cigarette smoke. And on a corner of Rue de Chapeliers, where the cobblestones are cracked and uneven, there sat a woman the world had forgotten. Her name was Amélie Laurent. She sat on a piece of flattened cardboard, her back against the cold stone wall of a building. She wore a gray coat that had more holes than fabric. A knitted scarf, unraveling at the edges, covered her graying hair. Her hands, rough, weathered, trembling slightly, held a small plastic cup. "S'il vous plaît," she would whisper to passing strangers. "Please, just €1 for bread." Most people walked past without looking. Some dropped coins without making eye contact. A few teenagers laughed and called her names. To everyone who passed her, she was invisible. Just another homeless person. Just another sad story in a city full of them. But if you had looked closer, really looked, you might have noticed something strange. Her eyes weren't vacant like you'd expect from someone who'd given up on life. No, her eyes were sharp. Alert. Watching. She watched every child who walked past with their parents. She noticed the way a toddler squinted in the sunlight. She saw the slight turn of a baby's head, the uneven tracking of their eyes. Old instincts die hard. Because 15 years ago, Amélie Laurent wasn't a beggar. She was Dr. Amélie Laurent, one of the most brilliant pediatric ophthalmologists in Europe. Let me tell you about the woman she used to be. Back then, Amélie lived in a beautiful apartment in the Ixelles neighborhood. She drove a silver Audi. She wore designer clothes and expensive perfume. Her calendar was always full, surgeries, conferences, consultations. But it wasn't the money or the status that drove her. It was the children. Amélie had a gift. She could perform surgeries that other doctors were too afraid to attempt. Premature infants with underdeveloped eyes. Toddlers with rare genetic conditions. Children everyone else had given up on. She saved them. Hospitals across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands would call her in for the impossible cases. The ones where other surgeons would shake their heads and say, "There's nothing we can do." Amélie would look at those children and say, "Let me try." And more often than not, she succeeded. She was a legend, a miracle worker. Colleagues respected her. Patients' families cried tears of gratitude in her office. Medical journals published her techniques. She had everything: a successful career, a loving husband named Philippe who made her laugh every single day, and a son, Julian, who was 10 years old and wanted to be a doctor just like his mama. Life was beautiful. And then in one single moment, it all shattered like glass. It was a Saturday evening. 7 years ago. Amélie, Philippe, and Julian were driving back from a weekend at the coast. They'd spent the day in Ostend, walking on the beach, eating fresh mussels, collecting seashells. Julian had fallen asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window, a small smile on his face. Philippe was driving. Amélie was in the passenger seat, her hand resting on his knee, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. They were on the E40 motorway, about 30 minutes from home. And then a truck appeared. The driver was drunk. He'd been drinking all afternoon at a friend's house. He shouldn't have been on the road at all. He swerved into their lane. Philippe tried to avoid him. He jerked the wheel hard to the right. But it was too late. The impact was catastrophic. Amélie woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. Her body was broken, fractured ribs, a shattered collarbone, cuts and bruises everywhere. But she was alive. Philippe and Julian weren't. They'd died on impact. Instantly, the doctors told her. They didn't suffer. As if that made it better. As if knowing they didn't suffer could somehow fill the hole in her chest where her heart used to be. Amélie didn't cry at first. She just stared at the hospital ceiling, silent, hollow. But when they finally released her and she went home to that empty apartment, to Julian's toys still scattered on the floor, to Philippe's coffee mug still sitting on the kitchen counter, that's when she broke. The grief swallowed her whole. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. She'd see Julian's face everywhere. In every child on the street, in every little boy's laugh. She'd reach for Philippe in bed at night, forgetting for just a moment that he was gone, and the emptiness beside her would crush her all over again. She tried to go back to work. She thought maybe saving other children would help. Maybe it would give her purpose again. But her hands shook during surgeries. She'd have panic attacks in the operating room. Once, she broke down crying in the middle of a procedure and had to be escorted out. The hospital board was sympathetic at first. They gave her time off. They recommended therapy. But Amélie didn't want therapy. She didn't want time off. She wanted her family back. And when she couldn't have that, she wanted nothing at all. She stopped showing up for surgeries. She stopped answering her phone. She stopped paying her bills. Eventually, the hospital had no choice. They revoked her medical license. Patient safety, they said. She lost her job. Then her apartment. Then her car. Her colleagues tried to help. They called, visited, offered money. But Amélie had already disappeared into herself. She'd stopped being Dr. Laurent. She became a ghost. And ghosts end up on the streets. For 7 years, she lived in that twilight world. Sleeping in shelters when she could. Under bridges when she couldn't. Begging for coins. Digging through trash for food. She told herself she deserved it. That this was her punishment for surviving when they didn't. But even in her darkest moments, even when she wished she could just stop existing, something inside her wouldn't die. Her instincts. Her training. Her eye for detail. She'd see a child stumble on the sidewalk and think, possible vision impairment. Needs assessment. She'd notice a baby's pupils weren't the same size and think, anisocoria. Could be neurological. She couldn't turn it off. Even sitting in the gutter, covered in dirt, she was still a doctor. Still watching. Still seeing. But what good was seeing when no one listened to a crazy homeless woman? And then came that Tuesday afternoon in October. The autumn air was crisp and cold. The tourist season was ending. The streets were less crowded than usual. Amélie sat in her usual spot, her plastic cup nearly empty. She'd made maybe €3 all day. Enough for a baguette. Maybe some cheese if she was lucky. She wasn't paying much attention to the people walking by anymore. Her mind was elsewhere. Thinking about Julian. Wondering what he'd look like now if he'd lived. 17 years old. Almost a man. And then she heard it. A child crying. Not unusual in this part of the city. Kids got tired. Kids got cranky. But something about this cry was different. It wasn't the normal tantrum of a frustrated toddler. It was confusion. Fear. The sound of a child who couldn't understand the world around them. Amélie looked up. A woman was pushing a stroller past her corner. The woman, Greta, though Amélie didn't know her name yet, looked stressed, exhausted. And in the stroller sat a little girl. Maybe 3, maybe 4 years old. Dark hair. Pale skin. Expensive clothes. The girl was reaching out, grabbing at the air, trying to touch something she couldn't see. And then the sun shifted. The autumn light came through the buildings at just the right angle, cutting through the shadows, hitting the little girl's face directly. Amelie saw her eyes. And everything stopped. The noise of the street faded away. The cold disappeared. 7 years of grief and fog and numbness lifted in a single instant. Because in that little girl's pupils, Amelie saw something that made her heart slam against her ribs. A white glow. Not black. Not empty. Not the dark void of someone with nerve damage. White. Like a cat's eye caught in headlights. Like light bouncing off something it shouldn't. Amelie knew that glow. She'd seen it 1,000 times in her career. Leukocoria. The telltale sign of congenital cataracts. This child wasn't blind from nerve damage. She was blind because of clouded lenses. And clouded lenses could be fixed. Amelie stood up so fast her cardboard flew away in the wind. Her plastic cup clattered to the ground, coins scattering across the cobblestones. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Stop! Please stop!" Greta whipped around, startled. She saw a dirty homeless woman rushing toward her and immediately pulled the stroller back. "Stay away," Greta said in German-accented French. "I don't have money. I don't want money." Amelie gasped, reaching out with trembling hands. "Please listen to me. That child, her eyes. Get away from us." Greta's voice rose in panic. "Her pupils," Amelie shouted desperately. "Look at her pupils. The white reflection. That only happens with cataracts, not nerve damage. Whoever diagnosed her was wrong." Greta stared at her like she was insane. "What are you talking about? You're crazy. Leave us alone." "I'm not crazy." Amelie's voice cracked. "I'm a doctor. I was a doctor. I know what I'm seeing. That child can be helped." But Greta was already moving, pushing the stroller faster, looking around frantically for help. "Security," she called out. "Someone help." "No, please." Amelie started following them, stumbling in her worn-out shoes. "Please, just let someone examine her properly. Don't let her stay in the dark. Not when she doesn't have to." She was crying now. Not just for this child. For all the children. For Julian. For the doctor she used to be. "Not another child," she sobbed. "Please, not another one." But Greta kept walking, faster and faster, terrified of this mad beggar woman chasing her through the streets. And then, at the corner, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit stepped out. Amelie stopped running. She stood there, breathless, tears streaming down her dirty face. Because she recognized him immediately. She'd seen his photo on a hospital donor wall years ago. Henrik Vandenberg. And the little girl in the stroller was his daughter. Amelie's voice came out as a whisper, carried on the cold October wind. "Mr. Vandenberg, your daughter can see. She just needs someone brave enough to try." Henrik turned slowly. His eyes met hers. And in that moment, everything changed. For a moment, nobody moved. Henrik Vandenberg stood on the sidewalk in his perfectly tailored suit, his hand still on the car door. Greta was frozen beside the stroller, her face pale with fear. And Amelie, dirty, trembling, tears streaming down her face, stood there waiting. Waiting to see if he would listen. Or if he would walk away like everyone else. Henrik's eyes narrowed. His voice was cold, controlled. "Greta, what's going on?" This woman," Greta stammered in German. "She followed us. She's saying crazy things about Elise's eyes. I think she's mentally ill. I was just trying to." "I'm not mentally ill," Amelie interrupted, her voice stronger now. She switched to French, then to English, knowing Henrik would understand. "And I'm not here to hurt anyone." Henrik took a step closer, his bodyguard moving to intercept. But Henrik held up a hand, stopping him. "Then what do you want?" Henrik asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Money? Is this some kind of scam?" Amelie shook her head. "I don't want your money, Mr. Vandenberg." Henrik froze. "How do you know my name?" "Your photograph," Amelie said quietly. "It hangs in the pediatric wing of St. Luke Hospital. You donated €2 million 7 years ago. After your wife passed away." The color drained from Henrik's face. That donation had been private. Anonymous. Only the hospital board and senior medical staff knew about it. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. Amelie stood straighter, even though her coat was threadbare and her shoes were falling apart. Even though she smelled like the streets and looked like she'd been living in the shadows. My name is Dr. Amélie Laurent. I was the head of pediatric ophthalmology at St. Luc for 10 years. I've performed over 3,000 surgeries on children's eyes. Henrik stared at her. He knew that name. Everyone in Brussels medical circles knew that name. Amélie Laurent died, he said slowly. I heard there was an accident. Her family died. Amélie finished, her voice hollow. Yes, my husband and son died. And the woman I was died with them. She gestured to herself. This is what's left. A heavy silence fell over the street corner. Henrik looked at this broken woman standing before him. And for the first time in years, he felt something other than his own pain. He felt hers. I'm saying they chose the safest diagnosis, Amélie said. Irreversible nerve damage means no surgery. No risk. No blame. They can look you in the eye and say we did everything we could without ever having to actually try. Those bastards, Henrik whispered. Then louder. Those absolute bastards. People on the street were starting to stare. The bodyguard looked uncomfortable. But Henrik didn't care. His entire world was crumbling and rebuilding itself at the same time. Can you fix her? He asked Amélie, his voice raw with desperate hope. Amélie looked down at her trembling hands. I can't operate. My license was revoked. I haven't held a scalpel in 7 years. I live on the streets, Mr. Vandenberg. No hospital would let me through the door. Henrik's hope began to collapse. Then why tell me? Why give me hope just to? But I can guide them, Amélie interrupted fiercely. I can tell you exactly what needs to be done. I can oversee the surgery. I can make sure the right hands touch your daughter's eyes. I still remember everything. Every technique. Every complication. Every solution. She stepped closer, looking him directly in the eyes. I couldn't save my son, Mr. Vandenberg. But I can save your daughter. If you trust me. Trust. That was the word, wasn't it? Henrik looked at this homeless woman. This broken, forgotten doctor. And then he looked at his daughter. At Elise, who had never seen his face. Who had never seen a sunrise or a flower or her own reflection in a mirror. Who had spent 3 years in darkness because wealthy doctors were too afraid to try. The decision took him less than 5 seconds. Get in the car, he said. Amélie blinked. What? Get in the car, Henrik repeated, opening the door. We're going to St. Luc Hospital. Right now. Mr. Vandenberg, I'm filthy. I smell. They won't. I don't care, Henrik said firmly. You saw what they missed. That makes you the only person I trust. Greta looked horrified. Sir, are you sure this is? Put Elise in her car seat, Henrik ordered. We're leaving. Amélie stood there, stunned. For 7 years, she'd been invisible. People had stepped over her. Spat at her. Pretended she didn't exist. And now this man, this powerful, wealthy man, was asking her to get into his car. Why? She whispered. Why would you believe me? Henrik looked at her, and his eyes were filled with tears. Because you have nothing to gain and everything to lose by lying to me, he said simply. Because you're the first person in 3 years who's looked at my daughter and seen hope instead of pity. And because, his voice broke, because I'm her father, and I will trust a homeless stranger if it means giving her even the smallest chance to see. Amélie nodded, tears streaming down her face. She climbed into the Mercedes. The leather seats felt like a dream. The warmth felt like coming home. Greta got in with Elise. Henrik slid in beside them. Drive, he told his driver. Fast. The car pulled away from the curb, cutting through Brussels traffic like a knife. 20 minutes later, they arrived at St. Luc Hospital. Henrik didn't go to the main entrance. He went straight to the executive wing, where the hospital director had his office. He strode through the hallways like a man on a mission, Amélie hurrying beside him in her ragged coat, Greta following with Elise in her arms. Nurses stared. Doctors whispered. Security guards reached for their radios. But nobody stopped Henrik Vandenberg. They reached the office of Dr. François Mercier, the chief of pediatric ophthalmology. Henrik didn't knock. He kicked the door open. Dr. Mercier looked up from his desk, startled. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expensive watch. Mr. Vandenberg, he said, standing up quickly. What a surprise. Is everything? He stopped when he saw Amélie. His nose wrinkled. What is this? Why have you brought a vagrant into my... Shine a penlight into my daughter's eyes, Henrik said coldly. Dr. Mercier blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. Shine. A penlight. Mr. Vandenberg, we've already done comprehensive. Do it now, Henrik's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. or I will call a press conference in this hallway and tell every journalist in Belgium that you refused to perform a simple test. Your choice. You have 10 seconds. Dr. Mercier's face went pale. He fumbled in his desk drawer and pulled out a penlight. The room went silent. He approached Elise nervously. Greta held her steady. It's okay, Liebchen, Greta whispered. Just a quick light. Dr. Mercier clicked the penlight on. He shone it into Elise's right eye. The white reflection appeared instantly. He moved to the left eye. Same thing. The penlight slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. Oh my God, he breathed. Say it, Henrik demanded. Say what you see. Dr. Mercier's hands were shaking. Leukocoria. Bilateral leukocoria. It's consistent with congenital cataracts. The room seemed to tilt. You told me she had nerve damage, Henrik said, his voice dangerously quiet. You told me it was irreversible. Mr. Vandenberg, please understand. Understand what? Henrik roared. The windows rattled. That you let my daughter live in darkness for 3 years to protect your precious reputation? The surgery is extremely delicate, Dr. Mercier protested. On an infant, the risks. She's not an infant anymore, Amelie spoke up quietly. She's 3 years old. Her eyes are developed enough. The surgery is complex, yes. But it's doable. I've done it dozens of times. Dr. Mercier finally looked at her. Really looked at her. His eyes widened. Amelie? Amelie Laurent. Hello, Francois, she said softly. They'd been colleagues once. Before her world fell apart. What happened to you? He whispered. Life happened, she said. But that's not important right now. What's important is that little girl. She stepped forward, and despite her appearance, she carried herself like the surgeon she used to be. You're going to assemble your best surgical team. You're going to prepare an operating theater. And you're going to perform a bilateral cataract extraction with lens implantation on Elise Vandenberg. I can't just. You will, Henrik said. And Dr. Laurent will supervise. She'll guide every step. She doesn't have a license, Dr. Mercier protested. Then reinstate it, Henrik said flatly. You're the chief of this department. You have that authority. Emergency medical consultation. Whatever legal paperwork you need. Make it happen. Dr. Mercier looked at Henrik. At Amelie. At the little girl who had spent 3 years in unnecessary darkness. And finally, he nodded. I'll make the calls, he said quietly. 3 hours later, the surgical theater was ready. Amelie stood in the scrub room, washing her hands for the first time in 7 years. The hot water felt like absolution. The surgical soap smelled like memory. They'd given her scrubs. Clean clothes. They'd let her shower. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. But her hands were steady now. Her mind was clear. Are you ready? Henrik asked. He was watching through the observation window. Yes, Amelie said. She couldn't hold the scalpel. Her license was only temporarily reinstated for consultation. But she could guide. She could watch. She could catch mistakes before they happened. The surgeon was a young doctor named Dr. Chun, one of the best in the department. He was nervous, operating on a billionaire's child while being watched by a legend. But Amelie's voice in his ear was calm. Steady. Confident. Small incision at the limbus. Good. Now carefully, yes, just like that. Capsulotomy next. Take your time. Perfect. The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours of delicate, precise work. 4 hours of Henrik pacing in the observation room, unable to sit, unable to breathe properly. 4 hours of Amelie guiding Dr. Chen's hands like a conductor leading an orchestra. And finally, it was done. Lenses implanted, Dr. Chen said, his voice shaking with exhaustion and relief. Sutures complete. She's stable. Henrik's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. Amelie came out of the theater, pulling off her mask. The surgery was successful, she said quietly. Now we wait. How long? 3 days. Then we remove the bandages. Those 3 days were the longest of Henrik's life. He didn't leave the hospital. He slept in a chair beside Elise's bed. He held her hand. He whispered to her. Just a little longer, my love. Just a little longer. Amelie stayed too. The hospital had given her a room. Real food. Clean clothes. But more than that, they'd given her back her purpose. And on the morning of the 3rd day, when the sun rose over Brussels and light streamed through the hospital windows, they gathered in Elise's room. Henrik. Amelie. Greta. Dr. Mercier. Dr. Chun. A handful of nurses. Everyone wanted to witness this moment. Dr. Chen approached Elise carefully. Okay, sweetheart. I'm going to take off the bandages now. You might feel some air on your face. Don't be scared. Henrik knelt in front of her. His hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the bed rail. Amelie stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Dr. Chen began peeling away the gauze from the first eye. Slowly, carefully, and then it was off. Elise blinked. She blinked again. She rubbed her eye with her small fist. And then she looked down. She stared at her own hands like she'd never seen them before. Because she hadn't. She turned them over. Flexed her fingers. Watched them move. Papa, she whispered. I'm here, Henrik choked out. Dr. Chen removed the second bandage. Elise blinked rapidly. The light was overwhelming. Colors were flooding in. Shapes. Dimensions. Her brain was processing 3 years of darkness in a single instant. She looked around the room, confused, overwhelmed. And then her eyes landed on Henrik. She saw his face for the first time. His beard. His tears. His trembling smile. Papa, she breathed. And then she turned her head and saw Amelie. The woman whose voice she remembered. The voice that had fought for her on the street. The voice that had guided the surgery. Elise reached out her arms. Not to her father. To Amelie. Thank you, she whispered in her small, clear voice. Amelie's face crumpled. She dropped to her knees and caught the little girl in her arms. You can see, she sobbed. You can really see. Elise patted Amelie's face gently, the way children do. Why are you crying? Don't be sad. I'm not sad. Amelie laughed through her tears. I'm happy. So happy. Henrik wrapped his arms around both of them. Greta was crying. The nurses were crying. Even Dr. Mercier had tears in his eyes. Thank you, Henrik whispered to Amelie. Thank you for not walking away. Thank you for seeing her. Thank you for listening, Amelie whispered back. 6 months later, the Isabel Vandenberg Center for Pediatric Vision opened its doors in Brussels. It was state-of-the-art. The best equipment money could buy. Free treatment for any child, regardless of their family's wealth. And at the helm, as the medical director, was Dr. Amelie Laurent. Her license was fully reinstated. Her reputation restored. But more than that, her purpose was back. She saved children again. She performed surgeries. She trained young doctors. And every Sunday, she came to Henrik's estate in Waterloo for dinner. Elise would run to greet her at the door, her eyes bright and clear and full of life. Amelie, she'd squeal. Come see. I drew a picture of you. And Amelie would sit with her in the garden, looking at crayon drawings, describing the colors of the flowers, watching the little girl who had given her back her life. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. We walk past miracles every single day. We ignore them. We dismiss them. We judge them by their clothes or their appearance or their circumstances. We look at someone sitting on a street corner and we see a beggar. We don't see the doctor, the teacher, the parent, the person with a lifetime of knowledge and experience and love. We don't see the human being. Henrik Vandenberg learned that lesson the hard way. His wealth had built walls around the truth. His money had made doctors afraid to take risks. But a homeless woman, a woman everyone else ignored, saw what others missed. She saw hope where others saw hopelessness. She offered kindness when she had nothing left to give. And she changed everything. So I want to ask you something. When was the last time you really looked at someone? Not past them. Not through them. At them. When was the last time you saw the human being behind the appearance? Because the next person you walk past might be a hero in disguise. They might be the answer to someone's prayers. They might be holding the key to a miracle. Don't ignore them. Don't dismiss them. See them. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button right now. And subscribe, because we need more stories that remind us what kindness can do. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have stopped to listen? Would you have trusted Amelie? Let's talk about it below. Because this isn't just a story. This is a reminder that heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear ragged coats and sit on street corners. And they're waiting for someone brave enough to see them.